January 21, 1999, I turned 5 years old. And at this point, I was living in the United States of America, specifically Chicago. That whole year, looking back, was a very interesting year because of the fact that I was being raised by my dad, by the influences of the women in my life. At that point, my aunts, my sister, my grandmother, but not my mom. At this point, I was still living in Uptown. I had ended preschool and I started kindergarten. I do remember at that age, my grandma taking me in the mornings and picking me up in the afternoons. Now, keep in mind, that year, I didn't fly back to Colombia and spend time with my mom. And I remember that in kindergarten, I was one out of a few that did not speak English because at home, and with my family, all we spoke was Spanish. So at this point, English was a second language to me. Two memories that I remember vividly from 1999, that towards the end of the year, all I can remember was people talking of this whole Y2K era and how the world was coming to an end. And as a kid at 5 years old, couldn't fathom why is the world ending because of the so-called technology. It still blows my mind looking back at it now, realizing that I was alive during that moment. And one of the memories that I forgot to mention in the last episode of this series was in 1998 during that summer, thanks to my sister and her boyfriend back then, I was able to witness the last Chicago Bulls championship, which was in 98. I remember that summer when they won that night. I didn't watch the game, mind you, and I didn't know what the Bulls were. I was 4 years old, but I do remember my sister taking me out. We're driving downtown and all I can remember just cars honking and the celebration of the city and me just looking up at all these big buildings with the lights. I probably fell asleep on that car ride. I remember they had this Bulls plastic thing that had the horns on it. And I remember they put it on and they took me out the sunroof and I was just screaming. And it's just, it's just one of those memories. I was just like, was that even safe? Now let's get back to the timeline. We're at the end of 1999. The world does not end and we start the new year in 2000. The only memory of school that I had that year, and I remember it was early because it was still cold outside. How do I say this? I'm basically exposing myself right now. But I was in kindergarten that there was a kid that had made me laugh so bad that I peed on myself. And I still remember the outfit. I had these gray pants with my matching gray sweater. And all I remember was the teacher grabbed me. She took a desk outside, let me sit there, called my dad. I had to wait outside in the hallway until my dad came with some new pants. I remember seeing my dad in the face of disappointment he had. Now at this point, it's August 4th, 2000. This moment in my life was a crucial point. There's these moments that happen in our life that we can remember from the moment we woke up to the moment we went to bed. Looking back, it's hard to explain this day because I know for my mom, it was probably one of the most difficult days in her life. Being in the car with my dad, driving to the airport, and my aunts telling me that I was finally gonna see my mom. Now keep in mind, the last time I saw my mom was early January of 1999. Now it is August of the year 2000. It's been over a year and a half that I haven't seen my mom. And back then there was no FaceTime. I don't even think there was Skype. And I remember we got to that gate. And this was back then when also you as a family member can walk all the way up to the gates in O'Hare. And as soon as they opened the doors for that flight, we were there. So I remember seeing my aunts, a few of my cousins, my sister, my dad. And I just remember holding my dad that whole time. And I was so nervous. I kept saying, I gotta go to the bathroom. I gotta go to the bathroom. I was just so nervous. My hands were sweaty. They were cold. They thought I was sick. I was just in shock. So cut away to the moment that I'm waiting there with my dad. And this lady comes up to me and she hugs me. And I see this lady, I'm like, is in tears and gives me a hug. And I'm looking at this lady like, who are you? And she tells me, mijo, soy su mamá. And I couldn't believe it because at that moment, I couldn't recognize my own mom. At 6 years old, I was excited, but at the same time, I was standoffish because for almost 2 years, all I knew was my dad, my grandma, and my aunts. I knew I had a mom, but I didn't remember her. And as a kid, that was a tough part. And even right now, me recreating that scene brings me to this sad moment, because it's like, as a kid, it's something tough. Like, I couldn't recognize my own mom. Like, come on. Before making this 5-part series, I had to go down memory lane with my mom and my dad, and even I asked my sister. I just remember my mom being there for me, and I was excited, and I was in school. Now I had my mom and my dad together, and I don't think I ever told them this. I don't think I've ever told anybody this. But the first memory I ever have of my parents being together, me being old enough to see them, was here we were, 3 of us. My mom, my dad, and myself in this studio apartment, right? And I woke up during the middle of the night and they were watching TV. And I just remember them talking. And I just sat there behind them watching them. Just talk for like 5 minutes, and then at the end of them having their talk, they started making out, which, you know, at that age, you just freak out. You're like, oh my God. Now it's like, looking back, I'm like, yo, they were even excited to see one another. And I went back to bed. After being here a few months, in October, my mom locked in her first job, where she actually retired from, at this elementary school called Dever. That was more of the northwest side of Chicago. Her commute was crazy. I remember my dad, we were living all the way in Broadway and Rosemont, and we had to travel all the way to like Addison and Harlem. And I remember us making those trips, and I remember while we used to wait until she used to get out at 6 o'clock, my dad and I used to play soccer outside of the school. And he kept telling me, oh, you're gonna be at the school one day. In April of 2001, my mom and my dad decided to make a change and go from that studio apartment in Uptown to renting out their first house together. We upgraded from no bedrooms to 2 bedrooms. I had my own room finally, and my parents have their own bedroom. Before I finished first grade at the school that I was in Uptown, my mom transferred me over to the school that she worked for. And to me, it was a complete 180, because I went from a school with a diverse classroom to me being one of 2 Spanish kids there, and everybody else was white. Mind you, at this point, I still don't know how to speak English 100%, and being the new kid while all these other kids have known each other since preschool, kindergarten, now first grade. Here comes the new guy, and guess what? The new guy doesn't know how to speak English. I remember that summer, I did all I could do to learn English. That my parents used to put me in front of the TV, and I used to watch a lot of cartoons, and believe it or not, that is how I learned how to speak English. And one of those shows that I would watch religiously was The Simpsons. I used to say things like "Calabanga" and things that like Bart Simpson used to say at school. That's all the English I knew until I was able to defend for myself. So I was put in ESL, which is English Second Language, in 2nd and 3rd grade. Another memory that has stuck with me until now, we had just started 2nd grade. September 11th, 2001 happened. I remember being in class and the teacher having to roll in the TV because apparently something out there in the world was happening. Here goes our 2nd grade teacher to turn on the TV to the news, and all we see as 2nd graders is this building on fire and everything. We're thinking it's a movie. As soon as they realized what's happening out there in the world, they turned that TV off, they rolled that off, and they told us, don't worry, it's gonna be fine. Get back to whatever we were learning. That day I just remember school ending, us coming out, and never have I ever seen the number of parents that were waiting outside to pick us up. It was just a sea of parents from the doors all the way to the side street. Going up to my dad, and parents crying that day and just excited to see us. All I have to say was it's a sight to see, and just one of those that, you don't forget. Even though I was a kid, I was old enough to understand the tragic event that had happened and how that day changed the US forever. Then the summer comes along, and because of my parents' schedule, I had to spend my summers with my mom while she was working at the school because there's nobody else to watch us. So here we go towards the end of 2002. Still in these ESL classes. I'm in school, I'm with my parents, and what I remember before the year ended, we got a surprise. I don't want to speak for somebody else's story. What I can say is my sister and my nephew moved in with us. It went from me having my own room to me sharing my room with my sister and my nephew, which at that time he was 3 years old. I didn't understand what was happening, but life was. Now it's 5 of us living in this 2-bedroom house. We then moved again to this 3-bedroom apartment, not even a mile away from that house. To me, it was a shock because I went from a big multi-unit apartment building to us having this 2-bedroom house to then going into this 3-floor, 3-bedroom apartment building. As a kid, I was excited. So this is when my nephew started to become more of a brother than a little nephew because we're only 5 years apart. My sister and I are 12 years apart. You can do the math. There's only 3 bedrooms. My parents are in one. My sister's 12 years older than me, so she got to pick her own bedroom. So guess who I'm stuck with? My nephew. But here's the thing, being at that age, I didn't mind sharing a room. Here comes 2003. I turned 9 years old this day. I woke up from hearing my dad. I don't know, it's tough to remember because never have I seen my dad cry, but the day he got that phone call, it's another of these memories that are just so vibrant in my mind that you can't forget. I remember waking up from hearing his voice and not understanding what was going on. But when I get to their room, my dad's in tears, but at the same time, he's in anger. I had no idea what had just happened. So my mom grabs me, takes me out the room, says, "Give your dad a minute," sits me down in the living room and says, "Son, your grandma just passed." And I'm like, what? Here I am, 9-year-old me, knowing what death is, but never having to experience it. And I just remember that day, all of us being at home, being there for one another, and having to make that trip to the hospital was the longest drive we ever had to do. Grandma passed, and here goes this lady who was there for me. I'd just rather not speak on it. And that happened March 7th, 2003. And for the rest of the year, I cannot remember really much about it. 2004 comes around, and I turned 10 years old.